I always stand there looking at people. People come. I always stand there looking at people, wondering whether this presence thing will work. And then I resort back to a controlling intervention, start talking. Good morning. Another announcement, I won't be doing a workshop because I'm going to Uri's. Done. I really like Uri's presentation. I'd like to focus on shame, which is such an important aspect. We're going to be talking about another aspect, a different one, which is fear, terror. So we're going to be talking, oh dear, everybody's looking really serious now, you know. So I'll just tell you about my first NVR case ever. And I must make a confession, I was irresponsible because I started working with NVR without having had any training in NVR. Because I read Haim's article in 2001, 2002? 2001 in Family Process. So I couldn't sleep all night. I was awake all night reading it again and again, thinking of all my cases and, oh God, yes, that, do you ever get that feeling? You know, that family, and yeah. So the next morning I saw this woman who'd been referred to me by social services. I need to tell you that I developed a service, a team that provided interventions for families involved with social services, you know, with local authorities. So I've been warned about this client who was referred to me, this mother. I was told she had agoraphobia, she had probably post-traumatic stress disorder, she had depression, the psychiatrist thought maybe she has borderline personality disorder, and then I wondered, does she also have Tourette's syndrome and is left-handed? You know, so, sorry? Yeah, if you could bring the note, that would be great, thanks. It's just because you did it yesterday. So she sat opposite me like this. So, and you know, I was all fired up. I was going to do NVR, because after all, I read about it all night. You know? And she sat there squinting, looking at me like this. You know? And I said, why are you looking at me like that? And she was from Northern Ireland, so I don't think there are any Irish people here, so, but excuse me if I get the accent wrong. Oh yes, there's Declan, but this was Belfast. So she looked at me and she said, because you're talking out of your arse. and I did wonder then, can this NVR thing work with my clients? Yeah? Have you had that? Does it work with mine? Because, yeah, I know those nice middle-class clients who've got an aggressive kid, but, you know, my clients, the single parent who's experienced abuse all her life, who's on welfare, who doesn't know how to cook. You don't have that in Sweden and Denmark, do you? No. Okay. But we do in the United Kingdom. So, and also later I started getting referrals which were sort of like, oh, Peter, I've got this family that I'd like to refer to you, but you can't do your NVR thing with them. Oh, why not? Well, because they're so isolated. Because in NVR you need a support system, don't you? That's what you said when you did that talk. And I sort of started turning things on their head. It's not, we can't do NVR with this family because they're so isolated. This family needs NVR because they're so isolated. Because NVR is a treatment that helps people reconnect with people around them. And so I started talking to clients about support networks until one client said, yeah, we've got one of those too. We call it our unsupport network. You know, like Alice in Wonderland, where there are 364 unbirthdays. They have an unsupport network. So the challenge was not to find just the right therapy for these people. The challenge was to look at how can we use NVR to help these people? How can we use NVR to help people who are experiencing trauma, or who have experienced trauma? So eventually over the years, I sort of started seeing three areas, and they're just getting to fall into place in my mind and my work, the three areas. And one area is what happens around the family. Do you remember this client, social worker, said to me she has this, that? Can you imagine the conversation between the social worker and me? It was about everything that's wrong with this mother. Now, imagine you're this mother. Put yourself in her shoes. Imagine that you've been told for most of your life that most everything is wrong with you. Right? Can you imagine that? Yeah. Imagine that when you've done certain things that you felt were right, you may have been beaten. Imagine that you have been abused in different ways. Perhaps you've been neglected at times. And then, there's a very well-meaning social worker. In the UK, we have what we call multi-agency meetings. Do you have them here too? You know, where professionals meetings, where all these professionals get together, and we bring all our case files. Okay? Like 365 things that are wrong with our clients. You know? And then you walk out of the meetings and say, that was really useful. You know? And you feel really depressed. So this was the, oh, great. So this was the kind of, now I just need to find the right, we've been having some problems with the technology here. Ah, okay. So the wider system around the family can be troubling for the family. Yeah? So there was the very critical social worker. I don't think that was a bad person, social worker. The social worker really meant well. That's very important. The social worker was well-intentioned. Yet, as in Uri's presentation, that was lovely the way Uri worked, described when he was thinking in pathologizing terms about the client and somehow was struggling to maintain his empathy. It's a real struggle. When you think of the social worker's caseload, social worker may be responsible for 40 cases, 50, 60 cases, and may often feel overwhelmed. And categorizing people and telling them what to do can be an easy way out. Uri mentioned another thing. Uri mentioned saving the moment, not the problem. Is that what he said? Or fixing the moment, solving the moment, not the problem. With his caseload and his pressure, the social worker wants to solve the problem, and by trying to solve the problem, he tells the mother what to do. You must do this, you must do that, you must do that. So there's a very critical, and what happens to the mother when she feels criticized in that way? Imagine this family has very high levels of arousal. There's been very much trauma. There's been very much violence in the family. Yeah? So their levels of arousal are up there most of the time. And now the mother feels criticized. Where do her levels of arousal go? They shoot up even higher. Let's imagine that the mother's ex-partner told her that he was going to tell social services how crazy she is, so they'll take her children away. And then there's the social worker saying, you really need to learn to control your child, and you need to get some mental health treatment for your depression, agoraphobia, PTSD, Tourette syndrome, left-handedness, and the brown color of your hair. So the arousal levels shoot up even further. What happens when there's conflict between the mother and the child, and the arousal levels shoot up even higher? In a traumatized mother and a traumatized child. So somehow we need to make the environment, the wider system around the family, we have to help that to become safer, emotionally safer for the mother. There's another aspect to that. The mother's ex has just come out of prison. He's been seen driving around the neighborhood, closer and closer to the house. Anybody familiar with that from their work? Or is that just in my cases? Okay. And someone's told the mother that he's been cruising around the neighborhood. So she's getting more and more anxious. So there's not only critical and prescriptive others around the family, they are also coercive and dangerous others around the family. And how do ex-partners assert their sense of entitlement to the mother? often to the children. What if when there's a crisis with the child? Well, someone's on the doorstep, knocking on the door, very hard, because the lock has been changed. Yeah. Let me in! Yeah. So these are serious issues. So that's one aspect. The other aspect that over time I began to appreciate is that what is normal in most parents is often extreme in traumatized parents when they face provocative or threatening behavior from their child. Yeah. So when some parents, many parents will be scared of entering their child's room, traumatized parents may be terrified to enter their child's room. They may become dissociative, like one mother I worked with who, when her son looked at her in a certain way, she just looked at her in a certain way, she'd start rocking back and forth. And she rocked back and forth in my session when she talked about it. And I said, "Where are you?" And she said, "I'm on a desert island." Yeah? So we can't do NVR because she's traumatized. So she needs to be referred to adult mental health, right? Or does she need NVR? That's the question. So, and you know those mothers who say, you know, his eyes, you familiar with those? You know, his eyes, they're like his father's eyes. And the way he talks, the way he moves, just like his father. Just like him. He's got that same devil in him. Maybe it's genetic. Yeah? Heim speaks of psychodemonization. Maybe it's genetic. It's something uncertain deep down inside of my child. And somehow it's linked to his father who is violent towards me. Okay. So the relationship between mother and son was compromised before the son was even born. Yeah? And we have to help overcome that. And there's a third aspect, which is, there's always been this either or. When I started working with NVR and Planet, which is part of England, sort of over there, people were saying, yeah, but what about the child? This is all about the parent, because all these children, they've been traumatized. So these children need therapy for their trauma and for their attachment. They've all got disorganized attachment. All kids are disorganized attachment, you know. Apart from having Tourette syndrome, ADHD, being on the autism spectrum, etc., etc., etc. You sort of think, you know, and then you get these questions, you know, are there outcome studies proving that NVR works for kids that are on the autism spectrum, have ADHD, brown hair, and are left-handed? Oh, and have Tourette syndrome as well, you know. Well, you know, it doesn't work that way. So there was this either-or between the trauma of the child, the attachment difficulties of the child, the pain, the distress of the child, and the support of the parent. Well, how can you just support parents when the child is in such distress? And I remember a child psychotherapist, I'll never forget, was saying to me, I really saw her distress. I said, how did you see that? And she said, well, because she wrecked my therapy room. And I said, I don't think you saw her distress. I think you saw her rage. You could not see her distress. You cannot comfort a raging child. You do not see the distress of a raging child. You see rage. And that's, to me, where the two things come together. My belief is we cannot support a traumatized child when he or she is raging so much of the time. We need to put out the fire so that we can help the child. So these are the three aspects that I've come to see as important over time. So, So some of the things that we've learned to think of when we think of trauma, there's something, do you have this here too, that there's something very special about being a trauma therapist? You know, where you sort of have to say, I'm a trauma therapist. This trauma is very deep, it's very profound, and we need extreme specialist knowledge to deal with it. Yeah, I think there are a lot of good tools. But actually, trauma, people recover from trauma naturally as well as through, for example, EMDR. A lot of people do, I do EMDR. Is the EMDR known in Sweden? Yeah. Yeah. My wife always says, did you do any of this today? Yeah, like one person. Or one of my clients calls it the wavy, wavy shit. She says, I think we need to do some more wavy, wavy shit on that. Okay. So, these things are very important, these specialist techniques. But actually, people also recover from trauma within their natural environment. The nuclear family is a recovery environment from trauma. Do you know, I remember many years ago, a ferry sank in the channel called the Spirit of Free Enterprise. Anybody remember that? Yeah. And after that, they were promoting a lot of debriefing in the UK. And I was very skeptical of this. You know, so basically you've been pulled out of the water and you see a counselor. You know? And I thought, people don't need to see counselors when they've been pulled out of the water. People need to see their mum or their sister. They need a warm blanket. They need a cup of coffee. And they need the prospect that life goes on, that life will return to normal. And actually, these are factors. These are resilience factors in overcoming trauma. So, we can see trauma as lying between people, and trauma recovery as lying between people. As Bateson said, the mind is not just in the individual, the mind is between people. So, it's our job to help move that forward. But then, that recovery environment is compromised when multi-stressed families, you know, I hate that term. I used to have a title in the National Health Service, which was Professional Lead for Complex Cases. Isn't that horrible? Who would like to be a complex case? Imagine getting a letter. You are invited to your first assessment interview with Dr. Peter Jakob, lead for complex cases. You know, oh God, a complex case, hopeless. Multi-stressed families are simply families that have to deal with a lot of crap. More crap than other people need to deal with. And that's remarkable. How do they do it? How do they cope with all this trauma? You know, would I be able to cope with all this trauma? Or as my wife says, who's a manager in social services, you know, there but for the grace of God go I. She's an atheist, but I think she'd want me to mention that. So, yet multi-stressed families attract dominant behavior from professionals, from wider family system. Yeah? So, I was thinking of one client who sort of came to me with a face like, oh, what's the matter? Well, because I had an argument with my mum yesterday. I thought your mum's in Birmingham. I was in southern England, a few hundred miles between southern England and Birmingham. Yeah, but I called her when Jimmy was playing up. Oh, so why did you call her? Well, I just wanted to offload, I wanted to get some advice, I wanted her to help me. And did it work? Because her face looked like, Well, no, she just slagged me off. Do you know that expression, slag me off? No, just told me how useless I am. Told me how I do everything wrong. Told me how everything was always wrong about me all my life. So there's a dynamic. Yeah, there's a dynamic. She seeks the intrusion of someone who is going to be critical of her, make her feel upset, make her arousal levels go up, so that when her son provokes her, she'll either fly into a rage, or Or if he gets angry because she flies into a rage, she'll go into traumatic fear. So it's very, very important that we can help these families transform their relationships. So I work with 3 principles, and one I call exception. Because this mother, she's got friends, you know, and I look at her face when I ask her talking about these friends. Like there's Eleanor. I always choose these old-fashioned names so that I don't accidentally use my clients' real names. Nobody's called Eleanor anymore today. But there's Eleanor, and when she talks about Eleanor, her face becomes smooth, her body becomes relaxed. There's a physiological response that shows that she feels safe with Eleanor as a person. So I asked her, what about Eleanor? Tell me about Eleanor. Yeah, she's my mate. Yeah, we hang out together. It's nice. It's nice. Oh, okay. Do you know we've been working on that announcement? Yeah, I got to talk about the announcement. Yeah. And you said that you don't have anybody. You don't have anybody who would support you in making that announcement. You thought of asking Eleanor. Nah, not Eleanor. Why not Eleanor? She's much too nice. That's interesting. What is the understanding, the construct of authority in this mother's mind? There's an equation. Authority equals dominance. Because I can't dominate, I need somebody else who dominates. Who better could dominate my child than my father? Because I know he's good at dominating. He dominated me. Yeah? So that's why maybe I need my father or my mother. You know the mother who criticized for Birmingham? Maybe I need my mother in the announcement because she can tell my son how it fucking is, you little bastard. Yeah? So, as we have this conversation about Eleanor, and maybe Eleanor, who's nice, with whom you feel safe, with whom your child feels safe, maybe she could be a supporter who's a witness to your announcement, who acts as a deterrent because your son is less likely to explode as fully as if you were there on your own. We start deconstructing her notion of authority and her notion of interpersonal strength, which has been shaped by dominance, control, and coercion, and submission. Because in her life, there has been dominance and submission. And if you didn't want to submit, you had to become dominant over the dominator in often violent ways. Violence was just... I was working with one client who felt so bad about the way she shouted at her daughter. And it's sudden, and I was thinking again, there but for the grace of God go I. I said to her, how many times in your life have you witnessed violence? And as I asked that question, I started thinking, how many times have I literally witnessed violence in front of me? I worked out about 20 times. How many times do you witness normally violence if you're a person in Sweden or Denmark? Anyone? How many times do you witness violence in your life? How many? 5, 10 times? Okay. Any other? Once? Okay. She could not tell me how many times she'd witnessed violence, so we started averaging out. And we came to about 400 incidents of physical violence she'd witnessed, at least. And I felt that was an underestimate. So of course, to her, the notion of strength has been associated with control through violence and submission. So by incorporating a safe other person as a supporter, we start helping her to deconstruct her notion of authority and develop a new one, a very different one. Well, one in which she can have strength, and she does not have to submit to her child or anyone else, but she also does not have to become violent. So I call that the exception principle. Why? Because safe support, a safe relationship, is an exception in this woman's life to dominant and coercive relationships. Those of you who are familiar with solution-focused therapy will know that in solution-focused therapy you work with exceptions. You start talking about exceptions. You get people to talk about exceptions. You get them to talk about exceptions more. You sort of say, can you tell me more about it? The best solution-focused intervention, by the way, is tell me more about it. Tell me more about Eleanor. And finally, Eleanor comes to the therapy session. Very difficult with these families to have traditional supporters meetings, big supporters meetings, because the mother's terrified. And remember, she doesn't have anybody, remember? She's totally isolated. Well, she's not. So we have a little supporter meeting, Mom and Eleanor. Now, what is Mom's impulse? Mom's impulse is to let Eleanor tell her what she needs to do. Or her impulse is to let Eleanor take over. Familiar with that? Can you imagine that from some of your clients? Yeah. So, what's our job? Our job is to help Mom center her support needs in the conversation, in the therapeutic conversation. So, okay, here you are. Here's Eleanor. Here's an empty chair. Your son is going to sit here. Okay? He's going to sit here. You're going to make the announcement. What do you need Eleanor to do so that you will feel that you are doing this? What do you need Eleanor to do so that you will feel in touch of yourself, with yourself when you do this? So that you will feel your own strength. That's the key question, and questions around that. And Mom won't be used to talking in that way. But it's pretty good to start with Eleanor, but we can move on to what I call utilization. Let's go back to Grandmother Mabel in Birmingham. Remember Grandmother Mabel in Birmingham who shouted down from, yeah, stupid fucking bitch, because you're so stupid, you ought to give him a whacking. It's your own fault. Excuse my language, by the way, I'm just quoting. You got to give him a whacking. You got to hit him. I can't do a Northern English accent. I can't do English accents at all. So it sounds different. It sounds Northern English. No, Birmingham's Midlands, so middle, in the middle. So what do? Do we dismiss the grandmother? And I would choose not to dismiss the grandmother because I believe that the grandmother is well-intentioned. The grandmother has grown up with the very same construction of authority, with the very same experience of violence. So of course, if I'm going to help my daughter, I'm going to tell my grandson, and you fucking shut up, you little shit. Or I'm going to get your grandfather who's going to whip the shit out of you, okay? So I'm really trying to help my daughter, aren't I? I am. So it's our job as therapists to help the family appreciate the positive intentions of that person who is critical and prescriptive towards the mother, towards the child. Okay? So we develop a positive connotation. Are you familiar with systemic family therapists? Am I familiar with positive symptom connotation? Yeah? Or as my family therapy trainer used to call it, turning shit into roses. Yeah? We pick up what's positive. And that's very important. And I'm thinking back to Uri's talk about shame. Shame is such a pervasive feeling in families where there's been trauma. And I believe that positive connotation, I think that's what Uri was demonstrating. Positive connotation, or Uri called it, I like that, reminding people of their values. So I could say to grandmother, you know, I think you really want to help your daughter. And I think you really want your grandson to grow up to become a productive member of society. You know? And I think you really want to do something in that direction. So then I asked the mother, so how could your mother help you? What do you need your mother to do so that you feel that you're in charge when we do the announcement? And you know what she says? Her answer is, shut up! I need her to shut up. Okay. So, what will her positive, helpful, supportive silence feel like? Okay, so we have to move from I need her to shut up, to stop doing something, to thinking about what do I actually want my mother to do? Okay? So that's a step from stop doing what you're doing to I need you to do this. Okay, so where do you want your mother to sit? Can you show your mother? Okay. So what do you need your mother to say if your grandson provokes her? If he provokes you, what do you need her to say? You know, so we talk about that. I remember working with one mother and a neighbor. Social services had warned me not to work with a neighbor. Don't include the neighbor in your NVR. I said, why? Oh, she's known to the local authority, the family, which is why I wanted to include her in my NVR. Because I want to know what's going on, what's the interaction between the mother. So with this neighbor, so we were talking about, you know, okay, so Lois just said she'd like you to just sit there quietly and say, I'm helping you both. If her daughter provokes you, do you think you could do that? No. I said, oh, okay, but we just talked about de-escalation and everything. Yeah, de-escalation. That's right, yeah. Okay, so if she says, what the fuck, excuse me, I'm quoting again, is that effing bitch doing here, I'm quoting, would you be able to say, I'm just here to support you and your mother and not let her provoke you? No, none of my children ever talk to me. Okay, so maybe you can support the family in a different way. So this person may not be the best of supporters, but another person may be. So anyone who is, and that is the test really, anyone who is prepared and willing to accept the mother's own requirement for support can become a safe supporter. And they can move from the position of being a critical and prescriptive other into the position of becoming a safe supporter. Which is why I call this the utilization, because we utilize their positive intentions. And finally, we have the principle of resistance. Remember the dad who was circling around the neighborhood in his car? It was very threatening and very dangerous. We looked at how can we use NVR methods to support the family to boundary itself against the violent intrusion that so threatens it. Okay. So we've spoken about this voice of the traumatized parent. I've spoken about the parent who says, I need you to do this. This is what I want. So that I can feel my own strength, so that I can come back to myself. And thereby we help the parent no longer to delegate her authority to others. And it's our job, it's the therapist's job to open space for that in the conversation. We don't have to tell them that much. We don't have to say, well, I think you need your supporter to do this, because then I become another prescriptive other. But I can ask, so that you find your own strength when you do this announcement, so that you don't freeze because you're terrified of your son, so that you don't fly into rage, so that you don't go off to a desert island, and so that you're just there and feel good in yourself, feel good in your body. What do you need her to do? The parent gets her voice back, and those of you who are familiar with trauma, will be very familiar with voice as a metaphor and literal issue in working with trauma. Yeah, 5 minutes. I know, I've just started. I've just started. I go, okay. What would my helpful silence feel like? Okay. So I'll just rush through. I never finish. I always get waylaid. I don't know why. I'm not good on timing. But it's about helping the parent develop a new parent self. Yeah? Regaining her voice, she becomes a different self. She gets in touch. She's able to move into other states of consciousness when the social environment is compassionate and appreciative. So it is our job to help the environment around the family become compassionate and appreciative. I'm very inspired by the work of Kate Weingarten, who looks at what she calls common shock. So trauma in a very wide sense, yeah, or shock in a very wide sense, ranging from post-traumatic stress disorder all the way to small insults, small but hurtful incisions in our humanity. And she looks at the processes of compassionate witnessing and how compassion rehumanizes people. So I think this parent requires compassionate witnessing of her suffering and an acknowledgement so that she can feel human again. I'll tell you about supervision I did one time, a consultation with a children's home. And in this children's home, there was a carer who was working with this teenage girl. And this teenage girl spat in his face. She had been physically violent against him many times before, but this particularly hurt him, being spat in the face. And I was sitting here with him. Can you imagine sitting here with him, seeming very desperate but also very angry, and the rest of the team sitting there as if they were not quite there? Have you ever had that situation? It was like they were not quite there. And I had the feeling that his anger and their not quite being there had something to do with each other. And so I said, so how is it that this particularly hurt you, this being spat in the face? I'm going to remain professional. That's one of the things we say in the UK. I'm going to remain professional. It's a very high value, remaining professional. You notice anything? I said, did you look at your hands? Yeah, well, but I'm going to remain professional. And his fists were clenched. You could see the whites of his knuckles. So I said, so tell me, well, what hurt you? What hurt you here? And he told me he's a Romani. And he said, we've always been humiliated as a people, being spat at. And nobody fucking cares. Excuse me, I'm just quoting. And that nobody cares, he felt nobody in the team cared. And in the team, it was sort of like, well, he was only spat at. He wasn't punched. So what's the problem? So this conversation helped the others get in touch with their compassion for him. So this compassionate witnessing is an important step in that it rehumanizes people, and it helps people who have been traumatized feel entitled to resist being treated badly. But now, and this is the second part of my talk that I haven't got to. So I'll pull it together in one sentence. And I've seen this over and over again. As they were showing compassion and started planning how, as a team, they will respond to this girl spitting in their colleague's face. How they will show her that he is their colleague whom they really care about. And when they will show her that they also care about her, and she needs the relationship with this colleague to be as good as possible because he's her key worker and he's the only one with whom she actually gets on well enough. Yeah? You could start seeing the changes in him. So as we were planning the resistance, and he was becoming rehumanized, we were moving from compassionate witnessing to appreciative witnessing. They were developing a plan together and appreciating also how he could resist within the joint plan. You know, they planned on doing a sit-in. And appreciating him not only as someone who has suffered, which was the compassionate witnessing, but appreciating him as someone with whom they will resist together. And appreciating him as someone that also this young person needs. She needs him to be in touch with his own humanity. She needs him not to feel he is her continued victim. So, and here comes the second part of my talk. So that he can open himself for her needs. So that he can open himself for a dialogue of caring. Yeah? Where, in his imagination at least, if not in reality yet, she can actually show him where her distress lies. She can indicate some of her unmet needs. He can be receptive to those unmet needs. Those of you familiar with attachment theory will know about the process of paying attention, attuning to the child, developing empathy and compassion with the child, and then taking caring action for the child, for the young woman in this case. Of course, that is what she needs from him. And he became able to start imagining himself entering in that process. And what I've seen over and over again is that his fists became unclenched, his face became softer. We did a particular exercise that I'd like to do with you later in the workshop. We'll have to hurry up because I want to go into worries. But we did an exercise whereby I asked him to imagine that there is a dialogue between him and her around her needs, and that he is able to address her needs through the use of a reconciliation gesture, which the German colleagues in NVR speak of relational gestures, Beziehungsgesten. And I like that, but I also like reconciliation gesture because the relationships have been ruptured through violence, so I call them relational reconciliation gestures. I use those words. Yes? Beziehungsversöhnungsgesten. Okay, thank you.